You may have heard of today's guest from the books and content he's written about spey and steelhead fishing. He's covered casting tips, finding steelhead habitat, rigging, and the best flies for Great Lakes fish. But you may not have known that he also has an amazing book on another hard-to-master species. Today we're going to walk through the biggest tips from this book so you might have a better shot at a giant muskie this season. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a kid. I grew up around a fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone out there. Rick Kustich, Great Lakes spey expert and muskie hunter, is going to reveal some of his best tips on hooking up with muskie today. You're going to discover how to react and tease a fish to strike. You're going to learn where to speed up and induce a take, and where 80 to 90% of all fish takes occur, and the top 3 most important tips to assure you don't lose the big one when you get them on. Plus, you're going to find out how to hook up with me on our next Great Lakes journey this next season. Let's find out how to profile a predator, muskie style. Here he is, round 3, Rick Kustich from rickkustich.com. How you doing, Rick?
Great, Dave. Always good to talk with you.
Yeah, this is going to be fun to catch up. Our last episode, we'll put in the show notes, episode 476, was about a year ago, a little over a year ago. We talked, kind of spey, steelhead, a lot of the stuff you're well known for. And it's pretty interesting because today we're going to talk muskie, which is something, we've been up with you fishing now and done a lot of stuff around the steelhead, but I haven't fished for muskie yet. We're actually going up to fish this year with the Muskie Fool gang up there in kind of Wisconsin. But so I'm interested to hear today. We want to talk muskie, but let's do a little update before we jump into all that. What you've been up to the last year. Has anything changed, or did you have a normal year over the last year?
I had a pretty normal year. We had, good steelhead fishing. Also had some good muskie fishing. I had, one thing that I added this past year too is I went to South America, down to Patagonia region for sea run brown trout. So That was one thing I added to my travels this year. It was the first time I was ever down there and had a fantastic trip. And the trip went so well that I'm going back again next year.
Good. Sea run browns. Yeah, that's something I haven't done yet either. Is that big giant fish, right? Are these, do you guys see some big fish?
Yes. Yeah. We saw fish up to, landed some fish up to about 20 pounds. So
wow,
it was pretty exciting.
Yeah. What are you doing? Was that kind of just like a similar swing stuff that you'd be doing for steelhead?
What I like about it is it's a little more technical or tactical, I would say, in nature, where you're not just, hucking it out and letting it swing, adding some action to the fly, adjusting to conditions, in the lower, clearer water. Definitely was a stealthier game than, might think about when you're swinging flies. So I thought that was a good challenge. And, we were fortunate enough to have a wide range of water conditions so that we were able to kind of see able to use a variety of tactics and techniques and flies. And it was really it was an interesting from that standpoint, just interactive and tactical. That's a bit different from, your typical swing scenario.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was just listening to, we had Deck Hogan on, and it was really cool because we went back into the history banks of kind of spey and steelhead, and he got back into talking about when they created basically the snap tee, some of that stuff, and it was interesting now because and I think that was in the 92, so it's been, what is that, 30 plus years, something like that. Mm-hmm. So, it's been a while, but you've been doing this. I guess all the space stuff, and we'll have links in the show notes for that, but you've been doing that. How long have you been doing all the spey and steelhead stuff?
Yeah, similar length of time. I think I picked up my first, two-hander somewhere in that 93, 94 time frame.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. We won't go deep into that since we do have some episodes already on that, but I do want to get into on the muskie. Let's just start off the top because you have a book. I think that's always a great resource. Let's highlight that where people can track that down. What's the name of the book and where can they find that?
It's titled Hunting Musky with a Fly. If anybody would like a signed, personalized copy, they can contact me through my website or through Instagram. It's available through a handful of fly shops, bookstores, and always on Amazon. So plenty of different ways to get the book.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think that today what we're going to do is just walk through maybe a little bit of an outline of the book and help, folks out there find muskie. Because I think muskie is one of those things that's interesting because, steelhead is challenging for a lot of people. We know about, you can get skunked and all that stuff, but you hear that muskie is even harder. What's your take on it? Why maybe talk about that. When did you first get into muskie, and is it way harder than steelhead?
Well, I actually started, I've told this story a few times, and I actually write about it at the beginning of the book. My orientation to muskie is I grew up on Grand Island, which is an island in the middle of the Niagara River. And I remember first going to a fishing club that my uncle was a member of when I was young, very young, probably 6, 7 years old. And I remember going into the club and there was a big muskie on the wall, a mount, and, big mouth open, big teeth showing. And I was shocked to find out that that fish lived in our river that we swam in and that we fished in. And I think right then I became infatuated with muskie. And it was really quite, it was another 10 years or so before I actually caught my first one. And even that wasn't on purpose, but that just kind of continued to fuel my desire to, at some point in my life, really fish for muskie and really become proficient at it. Interesting enough, I caught my first few spin fishing, but I've never really targeted them with the spin rod. Every time, all my real intentional muskie fishing has been with a fly rod. And that started in the early 90s, somewhere around 1990, 91 is when I caught my first one on a fly. And I fished for muskies, a good number of days every year ever since that with the fly rod. So definitely an early adopter when it came to fly fishing for muskie for sure.
Wow, that's awesome. And then the book project, was that something that you've been thinking about for a while? Because you do have some other books that we've talked about before in the steelhead space, but what about this muskie book?
I had probably was something that I had thought about for about 7 to 10 years. I had at one point thought about publishing it myself. And then I pitched the idea one day to Jay Nichols at Stackpole Headwater Books. And that was probably somewhere, I'm going to try to think about this, 2013, 2014. And at the time, he just didn't feel like there was a large enough audience for that book. And then somewhere between like 2013, 2017, there really was a growth in fly fishing for muskie. I do think equipment and just more information being out there, better flies, easier to tie flies, all kind of occurred at one time. And all of a sudden there was this, and it's still not that it's all that mainstream or popular, but there was definitely a rapid increase in the interest in fly fishing for muskie. Jay recognized that and kind of came back to me and said, hey, you still have that idea of doing the muskie book. The timing seems right. So, from there, I think that was released in 2017 then. So that's kind of how the book came about.
Oh, okay, good. And we've been doing a few because we've been getting ready for this muskie trip up to kind of Hayward, Wisconsin. And so we've had a few episodes. We had one with Camden Glade, who is a biologist that talked about some of the research he did on food habits. And he cleared the air there that muskie aren't eating as many of the other game fish that we all love there. And then Larry Ramsell was on, who's kind of an old school guy out there. But how is muskie? Is it a small community? Like, do you know those guys, or do you know kind of everybody, even though you're kind of in New York and there's a few places around the country to fish for it? Is it a pretty tight community, or what's that look like?
Yeah, I think it's a tight community, although it has expanded enough that I certainly don't know everybody.
Yeah.
I certainly, I know, some of the more prominent guides throughout, North America. And been fortunate enough to fish with some of them. But I think it's a small but growing community. It's a community of dedicated anglers. I think it's, way I think about it is, muskie anglers need to be kind of comfortable in their own skin. You're going to get, shut out some days. You have to kind of check your ego at the door and, enjoy the chase and enjoy the hunt and really savor the victories.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a growing community of people that can, kind of understand and get on board with that type of approach.
Yeah. Is there any species harder to catch than than muskie, or harder to do it? You hear the fish of 10,000 casts, but do you find that it is one of the hardest?
Yeah, certainly in freshwater, I
Yeah.
would say it's the toughest to consistently catch for sure. And it's really just a matter of, that they're an apex predator. A lot of times they'll feed on large bait so that they don't need to feed often. There's also, it seems as though they just have periods of times or windows during the course of a day when a fish is going to eat. So it just really limits the times when you're really going to find an active fish that is going to react positively to your presentation. And I think that varies, really does vary. The one thing has struck me about muskie is that they live in such a wide range of habitats. It was something that I really kind of, when I was researching this book, really kind of began to understand. And I think that habitat, depending on the availability of bait, the type of water they live in, does impact how they react to flies from time to time. And so I mean, it's hard to say one blanket statement about muskie that
Right.
covers everything because, their habitat does impact so much relative to their behavior, I believe anyways.
Gotcha. So yeah, I think this is a perfect segue into talking more about some tips basically to help somebody find muskie. So and we're going to be heading out there. We could send this out to some of the guests that are going to be on, or just anybody who's interested in muskie. Do you feel like your book will apply all around the region to wherever muskie live? That you can find some tips in here in your book.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I tried to present it in a way that would, particularly with the fishing techniques and covering structure and things like that, that addresses structure in a wide range of different types of waters. So there is absolutely something I think someone could glean for just about any place that they're going to pursue muskie.
Okay, good. So in just looking into it, we're just going to kind of cruise around or hop around in the book. But I mean, right off the start, you start with kind of profiling, profile of a predator. Why was that the first place to start, and maybe describe what you cover there?
I think you just really need to understand what you're up against. Just being a apex predator, they're cautious. They can kind of pick and choose what they eat when they want to eat. I think just kind of understanding that a fish like that, its mindset and what you have to do as an angler, to try to turn that fish that might be fairly docile or might, they're notorious for following your fly, find that trigger point that's going to turn that fish into a, vicious killer. And, that's really what that's my feeling is that's what you're looking for what you're trying to do as an angler.
Is get them fired up to like just hammer it. And how would you do that and because a lot of times you hear that, the figure eight, sometimes you'll get, they'll be random. Like you just got to be always, don't take your eye off of it. How do you get that fish to take? Is it where you see it and then you do something there to actually get to take, or how does that look?
Yeah, I mean, to start with, sometimes you just get great grabs just as you begin your presentation. So I do feel as though there are fish out there that you're either finding them in their feeding window or they're on a hair trigger. And if you just, fortunate enough to present that fly in the right spot and provide the right action, that fish is just going to hop on it. I would say a majority of the fish that we hook and catch do occur in those situations where they're not figure eight feeding fish. But there is that aspect of it as well. And, very important that you are paying attention to every retrieve. Why a muskie follows a fly, I think it can be up for, great debate. But in my mind, it's just, the basic behavior of apex predator. They can be cautious and they can pick and choose. So a lot of times if you don't get that fish to kind of trigger and eat right away, they're curious. Maybe even playful at times. And when you do get those close encounters where you do see a fish where it follows the fly in, there are some techniques that can kind of get that fish out of that, more docile mode and get it into, a feeding mode. And that's really part of the fun of this part
That
of the fun
is.
of the game.
And in your area, I'm not sure. Maybe describe that a little bit, the area you're fishing, and then maybe talk about kind of the areas where the geography or the areas where you can find them.
Sure. And I'll just step back real quick on the figure eight. I usually figure eight every time that I retrieve the fly. And I shouldn't even say usually. I'd like to think it's all the time. Where even if I don't see a fish following, I'm going to do 2 or 3 rotations of a figure eight. A lot of times the fish is just following behind lazily or down deep. You may not see it. So engaging, the fly in a figure eight, you get a fish that you don't see. But, kind of getting that, having a routine of just rolling right into the figure eight. A lot of times what I have found that when I do have a follow like that, if I can engage that fish, and because, sometimes when they get close to the boat, they see you, just things look odd and they'll just kind of just slowly swim away. But if you can engage that fish in terms of having it just focused in on the fly, kind of forgets about you and the boat. And a lot of times those are the fish that you can trigger into taking. So I think that's, a key part of that is just having a routine for applying the figure eight and sticking with it.
Yeah.
We definitely hook a good number of fish every year just by that consistency and staying with it every time.
Want to experience a magic trick? On a certain river at a certain time of day, time slows down. Where is this place? Located in the heart of Montana is a place where people go to slow things down, to float down a historic river, and to watch the birds dance across the sky. Watch animals explore the open land, and of course, to fish. If you're looking to slow things down, Helena, Montana is waiting for you. Visit Helena, Montana right now. You can head over to helenamt.com to get a change of pace this year. Imagine your perfect cast in the pristine waters of Bristol Bay, the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. Togiak Lodge sits in this unique paradise, offering unmatched fishing amidst breathtaking landscapes. Envision yourself right now amidst nature's best, with every fish narrating its own epic tale. You can visit togiaklodge.com right now. That's Togiak, Togiak. Your story woven into the fabric of Bristol Bay, where every cast is a memory, every fish is unforgettable. And what is that figure eight? You're doing the figure eight thing, but what is it imitating? Why do you think that fish is hitting that? Why couldn't you do something else other than a figure eight near the boat?
Well, in my mind, it just gives you great control over the fly, or allows you to speed the fly up. Allows it to, and I always try to make big turns. And a lot of times I'll just do an oval instead of an eight. And when I make those turns, I make sure they're good and wide, so that the fish gets a more of a broadside view of the fly. Usually when they grab it, it's on those turns. So it seems like both the speed up and then the turns and giving the fish a broadside view.
The turns, exactly. And it probably knows the muskie, knows the boat's there, right? I mean, they'll come in and you've heard stories about them, but that's not a big, they're not worried about the boats, right? But
it seems like it, at least in where I fish, and I know you asked that question, I'll get to that in a second, but where I fish, water's very clear. They definitely see the boat, but it seems, and they see you, and but it just seems like if you can get that fish engaged, it's the only way I can describe it, is to get it engaged in the process and just really be interested in following the fly around in that figure eight. It seems to forget about you and the boat and gets focused, and I think that's the key.
Right.
But the other thing I'll add too, Dave, is it's not always the figure eight. There's times where, I think you need to kind of read the fish. Sometimes you have to react in the way that you're fishing the fly. I'll just use an example of my good friend Joe Goodspeed, who he has these flies tied with, he uses a goop on the front of the fly, and it just gives the fly a lot of action, even with just a real slow retrieve. So his flies kind of represent a bait that's like half dead already, right?
Yeah.
So when he's retrieving those in, and I fished with Joe a number of times, and we've used this technique, and he's used it a lot successfully, is when they're retrieving the fly in, instead of going into a figure eight, just kind of continue. If you see a fish following, just kind of continue that same approach and just try to tease that fish. And a lot of times I think the fish realizes that the bait, the bait is getting close to the boat and it's running out of time.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes, you'll get a fish to grab just out of that. So in those situations, I think speeding that fly up, since the fly looks half dead as it is, and then if the fly all of a sudden starts speeding up and going fast, it kind of looks unnatural. So I think those two approaches, the figure eight's my go-to, but if you're fishing a fly real slow like that, you need to read the fish's body language. And if it's engaged with that really slow approach, sometimes that's all you need is to continue to tease it and it'll grab the fly.
Yeah.
So just an alternative. No, there's no one size fits all.
That's it. So especially in clear water where you're seeing, or sometimes like how long might you see the fish follow the fly before it takes or moves away?
Yeah, again, really does depend on clarity. So yeah, I'll just go to I know you asked this question, but most of my fishing is done on the Niagara River.
Oh yeah.
And it is very clear at times. I mean, there are times during the summertime when you can literally see down 20 feet. So you can see a fish following from quite a distance, but that also works against you in terms of they can see you, they can see the boat. So it really does, it depends on clarity, how far away you can see the fish. Yeah, I prefer water that probably has more like a 4 feet of visibility. I think that favors the predator, and at the same time, I think makes predators more active and a little less wary. So I've had my best fishing when you have that water that's off color like that, 3-4 feet of viz. So it's far enough that they can see the fly, but they feel more comfortable. But I've literally had fish that have just come out of nowhere in those situations, right when you're starting to figure eight. You really can't see that fish probably followed in, but was 3-4 feet behind. You start to follow, the figure eight, and they'll just come out of nowhere. Kind of scares the hell out of you, but it's part of the great excitement of the muskie sport.
That's it. Gosh, and you're in a really cool place because, Buffalo, New York. We were just there when we were fishing with you here, and it was a cool area because you're right in between, right? You got Lake Erie where Jeff Liskay is down there, and then you got Lake Ontario to the north, and then you got the Niagara. What is going on? Maybe describe that first of all. The Niagara River, is that how that's draining between the areas there, and then where these muskie are they in the rivers, the lakes? Are they everywhere?
Yeah, so the Niagara River drains from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. So it's essentially, it's a river, but it's more appropriately a straight or a thoroughfare. But it's 30 some miles long. In between is the Niagara Falls, about halfway down, I would say, approximately. We do most of our muskie fishing above the falls in the upper Niagara River. Decent population. It's fluctuated. I'd say the numbers are a little bit down right now, but still a good fishable population and some really big fish. It gets some very girthy muskies. From a numbers standpoint, probably there's many places that, you can encounter more fish during the course of a day, but it is certainly a place that's fun to fish and challenging and rewarding when you put in your time. But New York has a pretty diverse muskie fishery. There's a handful of lakes inland that also have good populations of muskies. Some are naturally reproduced, and there's a good hatchery program as well. And it also has a good handful of rivers that have muskie populations as well. So really a diverse fishery, nowhere near the densities of fish that you may find in places like Wisconsin or Minnesota, but certainly a wide and varied fishery that provides good challenge.
Were they and so are muskie native to this New York area?
They are.
Yeah.
Yep. The fish in the Niagara. So there's 3 different recognized strains of muskies. One is kind of that northern strain that you'll find in Wisconsin and Ontario, kind of throughout that area. Then there's the Ohio River strain or Chautauqua strain, which you'll find in the, kind of throughout the Ohio River Valley. And then there's Great Lakes strain, which you'll find in the, the Great Lakes and their tributaries and, the connecting waterways. So in the Niagara, that's what we have, Great Lakes strain. But also, the inland lakes have the Ohio River strain.
Okay.
They were native to Chautauqua Lake.
Gotcha. And then what about overall throughout the country, the country, the world? Where else can you find, have muskie been planted in lots of places around?
Yeah, it's a significant increase in their range. For For the most part, their native range was more in the northeastern to midwestern states, more in the northern half, but the original range does go down into North Carolina, even into northern Georgia, I believe, up through Ontario, in Maine, a couple spots in Maine, and then all the way over, west into Manitoba, down into Indiana, Illinois. But it's really spread into further out. Nebraska has, they've stocked some reservoirs and lakes and things like that. And then as you get out west, there's tiger muskie, which are hybrid between pike and muskie. They're sterile, can't spawn, but have been used in a number of lakes. So I mean, they're widespread. I think state of Washington, Colorado, Utah, all have tiger muskie populations.
Yeah, that's it. Nice. Well, let's keep moving in through the book a little bit. And, one of the other chapters you talk about is kind of, you call it, I think, head in the game, but that's a big part of this, right? Like, describe that as that. So how do you keep your head in the game when you're maybe going all day long without touching a fish? Does that happen occasionally?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's certainly days where, A, you don't, hook any fish, or B, you don't even see any fish. I mean, that happens a little less if you know your water well. But yes, I mean, you just really need to, I think that takes time from a confidence standpoint. If you're new to the game, it's hard, if you have a couple fishless days, you question, what you're doing, you question your flies, times just question your use of time,
right?
Whether you should be fishing for something else. I mean, you definitely go through some, mental exercises there, but, I think as you become more experienced, you realize that every cast you make, you're one cast closer to hooking a fish. And that if you just stick with it, no matter how bleak it looks or how slow, even if you get into a real slow streak, that at some point it's all going to turn around. And you just want to keep fishing good water and making good presentations. And at some point, something good is going to happen. And, keeping your head in the game is also critical when we've just talked about these close encounters and things of that nature. My feeling is if you're out there fishing, give it your all, don't half-ass it.
Yeah.
Because, you're kind of one fish or one cast away from potentially the fish of a season, the fish of a lifetime, So you do want to just make sure you're ready. I mean, if you're fatigued, I think you're better off taking 5 or 10 minutes off and just having a drink, have some food, something like that, re-energize. But, really, if you have your fly in the water, be engaged and be ready because it could happen at any time.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Yeah, don't be half-assing it. Like, just throwing your thing out there, looking away, eating some food, drinking a beer while you want to be ready to go because, like you said, it's one cast, that one fish could be it. It might make your year, right?
Yep, absolutely. That's how you got to look at this. I mean, it's really, for the most part, it's like big game hunting. I mean, if anybody's ever, hunted for deer, hunted for elk, you kind of, want to adapt a similar attitude that each time out, you're not going to necessarily hook anything, not necessarily going to land one, but you are trying to get closer every time. You want to learn something every time. And like I said, every cast you make is, one cast closer to, putting one in the net.
That's awesome. What is it? You kind of mentioned the water, the habitat. What is the good water? So you're talking about mostly you're fishing in the Niagara River. Is that the case? And then how do you find, that good water where they are?
Like I said earlier, I mean, fish live in just such a wide and varied. Muskies live in some of the biggest lakes in North America, live in some of the biggest rivers in North America, and you can also find them in small rivers, even small tributary creeks to rivers. So, I mean, what they use for habitat in those different areas, can vary quite a bit. A few things that I always look for, though, first thing is muskies are rarely going to be very far away from a food source. So, it's one thing to always keep in mind, especially if you're fishing bigger or more open water. So in water like the Niagara or big lakes, they're usually going to be close to, well, not usually, they're always going to have, some access to food so that when they're ready, they know where to find it or where to look. So that's one thing. I mean, just try to become, familiar with the various baits and natural baits that the muskie eat in the water that you're fishing,
Yep.
and learn a bit about their habitats. I mean, electronics can help you locate, sometimes help you locate where the bait is. Other times you're just going to visibly see bait, things like that. So that's one thing. I always kind of keep that in the back of my mind. And that really seems to ring true from year to year. I mean, I may find fish in one spot in one year and then not in the next. And when you really do some analysis of it, it's usually got to do with there was bait there one year and that's not there the next.
Yeah.
In terms of structure, muskies kind of live on the edges. So I always kind of think in terms of that. There's no hard and fast rules. I mean, they're rule breakers. I mean, there's going to be times where you may find them in water that you wouldn't expect. But for the most part, edges, ledges. So for the most part, I'm going to first look for weed beds and weed edges and things of that nature. Weeds usually hold a good sampling of the ecosystem in any river or lake. So there's usually going to represent good food sources around weeds. So always my go-to structure.
Yeah. Is that usually on the margins of the river? Or are you fishing in, middle of the river, different areas like that?
Well, certainly it's usually more on the margins, but, weed beds can kind of crop up everywhere too, and, even in 10, 12, 14 feet of water. So I think trying to find even those deep weed beds a lot of times will house fish.
Gotcha.
So, that's kind of my go-to, just kind of looking for weeds, looking for weed edges, looking for drop-offs, even away from weeds, looking for areas that kind of create some type of a structure. It just seems like we're always more productive finding water that's where there's a distinct change in depth.
Yeah. Do you use you hear about this sometimes, and I guess, I think we talked about this maybe on the other Muskie episode, but like the new sonar, this new tech that you can see, like it's almost like a video game. Are you using something like that to find the structure, the drop-offs, the fish, or what does that look like as far as your tech?
Yeah, I haven't gone as far as live scoping. Yeah, I haven't ventured into that world yet.
Yeah.
But I do use fairly cutting edge on technology with side imaging and down imaging and things of that nature.
So you can see the drop-offs, the structures, the weeds, or is it just, you're focusing on finding fish, or is it everything?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. It definitely gives you enough detail to show where the weed beds are, where the drop-offs are. Mapping that can kind of keep you along edges and things of that nature.
Okay.
I don't know. For my own, it's probably almost more than than I ever thought I'd get into.
Yeah.
I kind of like that. The mystery of trying to figure things out by yourself.
Right.
But I just even think from a competitive standpoint. I mean, all the other guys out there that are musky fishing have this type of technology. So I mean, just to kind of to stay abreast, it really is important in big open water, I think.
Yep. Have you heard any of those stories about the guys in your neck of the woods because we heard this over in the Hayward, Wisconsin, the stories of these record muskie where people were back in the day stuffing them with weights and sand and stuff. Have you ever heard those stories before and like people doing that in your area?
Well, definitely I'm very familiar with the stories up in the legends up in Wisconsin for sure. But I think in our area, we don't. We actually have an active muskie club in our area, and it's just really a bunch of good guys that are I think more stewards of the resource than anything. Some really good anglers in there as well. I'm about the only fly angler in the club.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? Oh, cool. Yeah, so you're fishing with a bunch of just conventional guys mostly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, guys that I know, they share information with me and things like that. And some of the guys that are fishing like bucktails and things of that nature are fishing similarly to how I do, so I learn a bit from them. But, a couple of years ago, actually it was the first year I was in the club, I ended up getting one fish that they keep, it's all catch and, obviously all catch and release. And, they keep records of all the fish and everything, mostly for data that the state can use to track populations and trends and things like that. But I did get a fish in there the last 2 years in their top 10.
Oh, nice.
With the fly, and it's I think it's pretty surprising to them that you catch muskies on a fly.
On a fly, yeah. What was the top 10? What was that fish, and then what is some of the larger fish you've seen out there?
I think last year the top 10, almost everything was over 50 inches, and actually we got one in my boat that my friend Nick Pianessa caught maybe in 2021. Yeah, you know, Nick.
Oh yeah.
But we measured that one out to be 53 inches, and that was in the fall. It had a huge gut on it. Yeah, that was just a
Wow.
absolute slob.
Yep. There you go. So you guys have some big fish too. And I think I can't remember exactly, but I think aren't the world record or whatever up there is what in the 60s in that range?
Yeah, and that was from the St. Lawrence.
St.
So
Lawrence.
that so the St. Lawrence flows out of Lake Ontario and goes into the Atlantic.
Oh yeah. So yeah, so actually the world record was caught not in the Hayward area, but more closer to your area.
Yeah, but I think that one had some.
Some tough
I
stuff.
think there was some controversy with that one as well.
Right.
So I'm not sure really where the world record stands, but there's definitely some big fish up there though. And the St. Lawrence produces some really big muskies on a yearly basis.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's take it to. So now we're in the river. We're in an area we think where there's some muskie. You got a ledge or a drop off. Let's talk about I think the casting is one thing, especially because it depends on what you're casting. Talk about that a little bit. What are you fishing with? How big are these flies? And then talk about how you're casting them.
Okay, and yeah, I think that's a good. Let me just step back
Yeah.
real quick to, I was talking about the bigger water and my water with the weeds and ledges and drop offs. Certainly, when you go into some smaller rivers and smaller water, I think the structure becomes a little more obvious, and you'll hopefully see that when you guys go up to Wisconsin and if you are fishing some of the rivers. I think, you're going to be fishing more log jams and things that you can see along the log jams and overhanging brush and things like that that give a fish structure. A lot of times in those smaller rivers, I find where fish are out of the main current, things like back eddies that are caused by points and, other things that are jetting out into the river, the upside or the downside of an island where there's nice slower water in, below. Those areas, it seems like muskies in those smaller rivers or in rivers like that tend to try to find good ambush points where they don't have to use a lot of energy while they're holding, but where likelihood of some bait kind of tucking into the soft water as well. So I think, a lot of times for fly anglers that are just getting into muskie fishing, that are experienced fly anglers, it does seem like those smaller rivers make the transition a bit easier just because you are fishing, structural elements that you may have fished for trout or bass. And it makes it just a little easier to transition to that type of an approach. But it's an example of how the environment can kind of dictate where you may find fish.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, start smaller if you can, because then you'll be able to see the structure and have a better shot. And probably smaller rivers, the fish are more, I'm guessing more contained in smaller areas. Like, how would that look in a small? Like, is there one fish, one giant musky predator that's got a big area section of the river, or do you know anything about that?
I think they do. At least where I have seen is they do set up. It seems like a range at different times, particularly when you're in the middle of the summer and everything's kind of, I wouldn't say stagnant, but there's not a lot of movement of bait and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I do think that fish do have a tendency to set up in a range if they have everything they need. But I don't necessarily feel like it's just one in a certain amount of area. I think if the bait is there and the structure is there for holding, that there'll typically be numerous muskies that would find that. Maybe the top fish might occupy the absolute best spot and be a little aggressive about it, but if things are right, other muskies will find that area.
Yeah, they'll find it. And do you catch, what's the smallest muskie you've ever caught or seen?
Oh, we'll catch some fish that are just in the low 20-inch range, juvenile fish. They're 2 to 3 years old. They grow pretty quick early in their life, and then growth really slows down as they get bigger.
Oh, right. Yeah, because a 50-inch muskie, just roughly how old is that fish, do you think?
Probably 12, 14 years old.
Yeah, 12,
like
14.
That. Yeah, but they'll be, at least in the Niagara, I don't know about everywhere, but here they'll be 26 to 27, 28 inches in about 3 years.
Oh, wow, yeah, 26, 27, 3 years.
So they grow fast early.
Yep, that's it.
They actually, the biologist has told me here that they spawn in May, they hatch, sometime shortly thereafter. But that fish needs to be about in the 9 to 10 inch range to survive the winter. So they grow real fast that first year.
Yeah. And what are they eating? Just saying, do they start off right away just eating other tiny fish?
Yeah, yeah, it was amazing. Last year we did a seining net study in like the shallows, the weed beds along the edge of the river in a few different spots, just to kind of get a gauge of the young of the year fish. And we would scoop up, I mean, we were scooping up hundreds, if not thousands, of small bait, young of the year bait fish, probably over 20 different species.
Oh, wow.
There's suckers and, different game species and things of that nature, shiners. And, so they're just in those weed beds eating that stuff.
Step into the world where the river whispers and the fishing is nothing short of legendary. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. Yellowstone Teton territory is not just a location, it's a gateway to adventures that will etch themselves into your memory. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake, and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. Whether you're planning your trip now or just dreaming it up, the YTT is where those dreams turn into reality. Remember, Yellowstone Teton territory, that's Teton, Teton. It's time to experience eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. So back on the river and talking about you getting set up. You've got, this area, maybe, you're in a smaller river, but maybe talk about that a little bit. Is the casting, because I know when Dan was talking about the casting, they're using some of the flies, like he said, up to 20 inches long or something like that, right? So they're using like almost, he was talking about, I think, using two-handed rods and doing kind of a hybrid cast. Is that what you're doing out there? Talk about the cast a little bit.
Yeah, so I look at casting for muskie. I mean, I think there's two different approaches, I guess. One for covering big open water, like, I fish most of the time. You're just trying to make as long of a cast as possible. You want that fly in the water as long as possible, especially if you're fishing depths. I mean, sometimes we'll fish water that's 15, 18 feet deep. So you want to have that opportunity for that fly to get down and stay down fairly deep throughout the retrieve. So the more distance you have in your cast, the longer it'll stay down. So, definitely the two-handed rod has really changed everything in terms of covering big water.
Right.
So, the rod that I'm using is like 9 foot 9 inches long, two-handed grip, usually using a line that's somewhere in the 575 to 600 grain range. So it's a sink tip with, integrated into a running line. I found that for loading up the rod quickly and making good long casts, that just having a fairly short head, so usually about 22 to 23 feet seems to be the sweet spot for me, allows me to get that head past the tip quickly and load the rod, and at the same time allows me to make long casts with big flies.
Okay. Is that a switch rod, spey rod, or is this a similar? Could you use a rod like that, and then is the cast just overhand?
You could. Yeah, you definitely could. The rod I'm using is specifically designed for overhead casting.
Okay.
But, a switch rod that can handle a heavy shooting head like that would be fine as well. And I do know some anglers that do that. The only problem with length, there's pros and cons with using a longer rod, one that's 11 feet or something like that. The one advantage is it does allow you to stick the fly deeper into the water, especially when you're, performing the figure eight. It's further away from the boat.
Right.
So I do think there's a stealth factor with that. But the length, at least from my perspective, just becomes a little more cumbersome working it around the boat and, lining up your cast and stuff. It just, the length's just a little more cumbersome in my feeling. But, some anglers don't feel that way.
Yep. So is the cast, so you have your line out there, you strip it in close, then are you kind of using a two-handed cast like hauling and stuff, or are you more water loading it and then just shooting it out?
No, it's not neither. Just getting the head past the tip.
Yeah.
And then just using the fulcrum of pulling with the bottom hand and, kind of pushing, guiding with the top hand, you get a ton of line speed.
Oh, yeah. So it is like a spey cast, kind of.
Yeah.
Or a spey using the lower hand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You get more line speed than you can ever generate, even hauling, as far as I'm concerned.
Gotcha. Where could you see this? Could you see a video out there? Any place online?
Actually, I don't have many YouTube videos out there, but I did do a YouTube video on this.
Oh,
It's about a
good.
7 or 8 minute video. If you just, look up Rick Kustich fly fishing on YouTube, it's probably the first video that'll pop up.
Oh, cool.
But, the idea is every time I'm stripping that fly back to figure eight, I'm stripping it all the way back to within like 18 inches of the fly. So to perform the figure eight, it needs to be fairly close to your rod tip so that the fly responds to when you're making your turns. So the key then to make your next cast is to get the fly line beyond your tip as quickly as possible. So that's really where, this whole process takes a lot of practice. The actual forward stroke and making the cast is pretty easy. And anybody that's ever spey cast or has even played around a little bit with a two-handed rod can pick that up quickly. But the key is getting from having the fly 18 inches away from your tip to getting the head back out beyond.
Oh,
And that's why a shorter head
is better.
works better than like a 30-foot head.
Right.
So basically what I do is I have, I'll just say this real quick, but I have the line when I'm stripping the fly in. I'm right-handed, so I got my right hand on the top of the rod. I'm stripping in with the left hand. And then when I complete, I'm still holding the line in my left hand when I do my figure eight. And then when I finish that up, I kind of just sweep the rod so that the leader and maybe 5 to 10 feet of the head goes out past the tip of the rod. And then usually one false cast will get the remaining head out, and then I can just make my forward cast. So I'm trying to do it as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Right. So you come through, so you're done with your figure eight, you got your most of the lines in, you sweep kind of forward, and then that gets the momentum to go back with one false cast, and then you're shooting.
Yeah, 1 or 2 false casts.
1 or 2. Yeah, you could do 2. Yeah, if you don't have enough out, you could do another false cast
Right.
and then shoot it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just kind of get it lined up, and it's all about efficiency. It's all about getting the fly back in the water. Again, I really feel a lot of times with muskie, it's a matter of statistics. I mean, the more the fly is fishing in the water, the better chance you have of catching a muskie, and this really helps facilitate that. A lot less wear and tear on the body too.
Right.
You'll feel a little bit in your back, but man, I'll tell you, it's just nowhere near the strain that one-handed casting is all day. I really feel that in time, this two-handed approach will pretty much anybody that fly fishes for muskie in big open water will adapt this approach just because it just makes total sense. And if you're out fishing and you see gear guys, hucking whatever, big 12, 15-inch baits, or even if they're throwing bucktails, they're all casting two hands. Every muskie angler out there is casting two hands. So it really just makes sense that, us fly anglers would do the same thing.
Perfect.
When you are on smaller rivers, I referred to that earlier, it's not all just about water coverage. There, accuracy becomes more important, especially if you're covering, log jams and, specific little, pockets and, back eddies and things of that nature. So there's still room for one-handed fishing, one-handed casting in those situations. I think you can get a little more control, making quicker casts and things like that, especially if you're not as experienced with the two-handed rod. So that's one area where I think the one-hander still has a lot of relevance, and especially for anglers that are just kind of transitioning to muskie fishing and not ready to go in full bore on the two-handed game.
Right. Good. Yeah. So there's a kind of an in-between segment where you don't have to go all in. Yeah. Gotcha.
And then just being proficient at hauling and double hauling, is very critical in that situation. You get good fly turnover.
Okay, good. Well, let's do a quick little. This is our Fly Shop Friday segment where we're gonna take it out of here in a little bit today. But this is presented by Waters West Fly Shop. They're out on the other side of the country from you, up in the kind of the OP range, and they talk a lot about swung fly techniques. And they're actually salt too. It's interesting because I love doing these episodes because we're all over the country and covering things. But so I want to give a big shout out to Ed and Kyle and Waters West. But as we start this off and take it out of here, maybe just heads up on Fly Shop. So for you, where could somebody go? Are there shops near your area? Or who is your local shop? And then are there shops covering muskie out there?
There's just really one fly shop in the Buffalo area, and that's just it's a corporate Orvis store.
Oh, Orvis,
nice nice guys and all. And they do a nice job. In terms of fly shops, and you've mentioned them, and I know you're going to be fishing with them, but
Yeah.
Muskie Fool is certainly has emerged as the top shop in terms of muskie fly fishing, and certainly they're on the cutting edge with things for sure. I think if there's one other shop that also runs muskie trips and very warm water oriented is Schultz Outfitters in
Oh,
Michigan.
yeah.
Certainly another good quality shop.
That's right. So Schultz, I didn't even realize that. And we just had Mike on recently. So they cover muskie too.
They do. They do trips out of their shop up to Wisconsin each year and fish with Chris Willen up there.
Oh, yeah, Chris, right.
Yeah. So from your discussions with Mike, very warm water oriented shop. So yeah, they definitely cover the muskie game there as well. And, they also have, Lake St. Clair right there, which, is probably the best big muskie body of water in North America, so at least from a fly fishing standpoint. And my friend Eric Grajewski is a guide there and does a really nice job. So so they kind of have that. They have both of those things.
St. Clair, yeah, that's the cool thing about Michigan, and well, where you are too. But I mean, you're surrounded by all this water in Michigan, especially because it's connected to 3 Great Lakes, right? Or surrounded by.
Yeah, I think it's 3, or does it touch?
Maybe there's another one.
I'm thinking it touches 4.
Oh, it does.
Lakes. I think so, because I think there's part of and Lake St. Clair, which is
right,
kind of a mini Great Lake in some regards as well. So yeah, Michigan's just loaded with water fishing opportunity for sure.
That's right. Nice. Good. So, well, let's jump in just on on your casting. You mentioned taking some long casts. So when you cast out there, as far as you can, you want to cover ground, maybe kind of like steelhead, right? So it was interesting too when Deck was talking about the rod tip and how you cover those areas far out, sometimes getting fish to take like way deep. But is that the same thing where you're casting as far as you can? That gives you more opportunity. But once you do that, are you getting fish hitting way out there deep, or how does that look?
Sure. Yeah. I think it seems like for the most part, I would say we get, 80-90% of our fish on the first 2 or 3 or 4 strips of the fly.
Oh,
and then
wow.
probably the last 2 or 3 strips. I think the beginning and end are really, I think, a lot of times you make that cast, that fly kind of flutters to the bottom. And then as soon as it starts moving, if it's a nice shot of a muskie, I think that a lot of times is a trigger point. That they see that fly trying to get away from them. So yeah, definitely you'll get some fish on the first initial strips from time to time.
Okay, and then the line you're maybe describe that again. What would be a line somebody could pick up as in like what type of line is this?
So that's the thing. There's really just beginning to become some lines on the market that really kind of match up well with this. I mean, I've had issues with this over the years, so I've been manufacturing my own for many years. But really what you want is a head that is about 23 feet in length. At least this is, based on my success, 22 to 23 feet in length. And that is heavy enough to load up, that rod. And in my case, the rod loads up around 575, about 600 grains, somewhere in that range. So there's a handful of lines available on the market that can do that. And there seems to be each year a few more that are meeting that specifics.
Gotcha. And is this kind of like there's always sometimes confusion around this. Would this be like, could you use like a Skagit type head? Is this the spey, that type of stuff?
You could, if you were, so these are designed more as shooting heads, but you could use a Skagit head, especially if it was an integrated Skagit head.
Yeah.
That is an approach if you're trying to fish flies more towards the surface.
Oh,
To
right.
use a floating Skagit head, you can use a long leader right off of the floating Skagit head. That's very easy to cast and very effective.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always go back to steelhead because I've fished so much for them, and the history is interesting there because, like you said, when you got started in the 90s and all that, that's when they were cutting up and, everybody was trying to figure this out. And that's when the first Skagit line came to be. They're like, they fish single hand rods, and then you're like, oh, this matches the rod. But
Yep.
that was the point, is that before, because Teeny back in the 80s, he was using the Teeny line, which was just a heavy line onto a running line, right?
Mhm.
But they learned that having that middle belly piece of the floating allowed you to control it better. So is that it sounds like with muskie, you don't need that. You can just get this heavy sinking line on the front of like a running line.
Yeah, what I'm using really isn't too much different from the original teeny lines.
Yeah.
It's just that most of them now have at least some type of transition there, so you don't get the maybe hinging that you got out of the original. So there's just a little bit more of a transition so that they definitely cast very smoothly if you get it balanced right.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, that makes total sense. Okay. Well, as we kind of taking it out of here, anything else we want to touch on? I know we didn't cover everything in your book, but I think
Well, let's cover a few things
yeah.
that I kind of think are key. Um, with the retrieve, for the most part, I'm just using, single hand retrieve. I like flies that kind of have a back and forth movement, kind of gliding from side to side. It does seem as though muskies like to attack a fish kind of from the side, more of a, T-bone approach. So if you focus on patterns that just through a standard kind of retrieve, and you can adjust your retrieve a bit, you can be a little bit more aggressive and snappy to try to help that fly jump from side to side. But a lot of it's just in the fly design, flies that have big bulbous heads and various ways of weighting them through the fly so that they kind of dance around a bit. I think that's a trigger point for muskie. For the most part, you can't add the type of speed that anglers that are fishing gear can with higher ratio retrieves, but you do have the ability to kind of play that fly in a way that makes it look like it's vulnerable,
Right.
and that a fish can eat it or wants to eat it. So I think that's really the key there is having flies that look like they're having some kind of difficulty. So just that slide back and forth. You can add speed by using a two-handed retrieve. I mean, that's another option. You're not going to get the side to side with that, but there are times where adding speed like that does seem to trigger a fish. So those are a couple things to think about. Two last things, I guess, that I would really leave anglers with. One is making sure you strip set.
Right.
For me, it's not, muskies just have tough mouths. There's not a lot of meat in there. There's a lot of bone, a lot of cartilage. So when I strip set, it's not just a initial strip. It's continuing to strip. It's a continuation until you feel you really have that fish tight. Yeah, I'm never worried about breaking a fish off. I'm using 30 or 40 pound test, leaders. And I want to just make sure that before I lift that rod, I got that fish tight. And, I think that's a big part of this. I like to keep my rod tip right in the water, first 2 feet of the tip right in the water. I think that's a really good tip for beginning anglers because it makes it more difficult to do a rod set,
Oh, right.
at that point. It's hard to lift the rod out of the water. So, if you ever want to test how much more power you get with a strip set versus a rod set, just have somebody, stand, 20, 30 feet away from you, and just have them like hold the end of your fly line, maybe put a piece of a yarn on there. If you lift up with your rod and try to pull it out of their hand, it's difficult to do that. But if you just use a heavy, hard strip set, you'll be able to pull that right out of that person's, grip every time. So definitely that's a key.
Yeah.
The next part is just making sure you keep a big bend in the rod throughout the fight. Again, a lot of times you'll hook a fish, and I don't think the hook gets in real deep, depending on where it is. So if you give that fish the ability to kind of loosen up a little bit, shake its head while the fly is a bit loose, good chance the fly is just going to come right out of the fish's mouth. I can't tell you how many times we get a fish in the net, and it starts flopping around the net, and the fly just comes out of the fish's mouth.
Yeah.
And, I know that wouldn't have got that fish in there had we not kept a big bend in the rod. So to me, that's really the key. Again, you shouldn't have to worry about, obviously you got to let the fish run if it wants to run, but as soon as it stops, you want to maintain that big bend. And a lot of times, muskie fights don't last real long. I'll show pictures to people and they'll say, "Oh, geez, how long did it take you to land that fish?" And I'll say, "Well, probably like 2 minutes."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They'll think I'm crazy, but I mean, if you apply a lot of pressure to the fish, a lot of times you can get them in, fairly quick. And, if you want to land a fish, a lot of times prolonging the fight is only going to give it more opportunity to get different angles, on the fight and change its angles. And, the more it changes its angles, the more likely that's going to find a place where that hook can pull out. So, not that I don't want to enjoy the fight of a fish.
Yeah.
Because you work so hard for it that you do want to enjoy it. But, to me, it's the most exciting 2 or 3 minutes in all the fly fishing. I mean, you know how hard you've worked to hook that fish, and you got this, you finally have accomplished that part of it, and you got this big fish on, and you're fighting it, and your knees are knocking. Even though it might be short-lived, it's about as, compressed, it's about as exciting as it gets.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times when you get that fish in the net, there is this sense of elation, but there's also that sense of relief that you're able to accomplish the goal. And, I think that's all part of it is, just making sure that you really have a good control over the fight when you have a muskie on.
Yeah, they keep them in control. That's good. Is it more exciting to get a muskie in your hands and land it or a steelhead?
Oh, definitely a muskie.
Yeah.
They're just even from the standpoint of the effort that it takes, to catch muskie versus steel. I mean, steelhead aren't easy either, but
No.
I always think in terms of, and you hear steelhead being the fish of 1,000 casts and muskies being the fish of 10,000 casts. And in my mind, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, that is pretty accurate. Good. Awesome. And then on the fly, maybe just touch on that real quick. What it would be a fly? You mentioned a couple maybe custom flies, but if somebody, is there one out there, or are these all kind of custom flies you're using?
I'd say they're more like styles of flies. So, I would look at there being, really a handful of styles that are out there. One that's become very popular is Blaine Chocolate's Game Changer style flies. And I've been using those a lot, and just, they're fairly, I tie some out of bucktail, some out of just various brushes. The bucktail ones take a long time. The ones with pre-made brushes usually go pretty easily. Matt Grajewski's yard sail. They're fairly simple flies, but they really move well in the water, get that side-to-side look. I mentioned my friend Joe Goodspeed. He ties these flies with a goop head with just very little stripping movement on the fly. That thing just dances around and just goes up and down, side to side. I mean, it just, really looks like, something that's, on its deathbed type of action. And then there's, again, a style that Blaine first tied, and I think a lot of anglers have kind of adopted and have made, it's kind of evolved and changed, but is the T-bone type fly. Just, a lot of bucktail at the front, long tail out of hackles and things like that. Fairly easy flies to tie. They're somewhat time intensive and material intensive. But I would say, most of the flies out there have various, and everybody kind of makes their own changes, makes their own marks on the fly. But, most of the flies that are out there have those, similar type of characteristics to them.
Yeah. Good. Well, I feel like we've touched on this pretty good today. I think, like we said, if anybody wants to take it the next step, we mentioned Hunting Musky with a Fly is your book that's out there. And are you planning on, looking ahead? Do you plan on maybe, looking at that next book? Do you already have a thought of what it might be? I mean, I know I'm not sure what you've done of recently. Now, which one came first? Did the Musky book or the last Steelhead book?
So the last book that I produced was the modern spey fishing.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. So, and the Muskie was just before that.
Okay. And then as you look ahead, do you have another project? Are you always thinking about that next one?
I have one that I've thought about that's, I think, a few years off though. Actually the modern spey fishing book kind of burnt me out a little bit on writing and producing, another book. So I think at this point I'm, going to continue to, write articles and things of that nature, would take a little break from the book writing. But I do have one other idea that at some point I'd like to explore.
Okay. And now you've mastered, steelhead, muskie. What is the next fish out there that's even going to be harder?
Oh boy, I don't know. I don't know if I got enough time in my life to start mastering.
I'm trying to think, what is the one? What's harder than muskie? What's even close?
Well, the one thing that I've always envisioned that I would, when I got to this point in my life, that I would try to spend a little time doing is some more tarpon fishing. I've done a little over, off and on in my life, but I would like to spend a little more time doing that.
Yeah.
So that's in the back of my mind.
Right. So maybe there's a tarpon book down the line.
I don't think I'll ever get to that point. I think that'll be just more recreation.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we're hoping to get a tarpon trip. We've been talking a little bit with Bruce Shard about doing something, but yeah, there's so many opportunities. I'm kind of the same thing. You kind of think, well, you got a certain amount of time left. Where are you going to focus your energy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, I mean, there's so many places that I still kind of want to go relative to muskie, or even just, continuing to learn what I can about my local fisheries, that I still have a lot of energy for that going forward. I also, have energy to kind of start doing a little bit more West Coast steelheading again.
Yeah.
It was something I did regularly. COVID really seemed to knock me off the track there. And then, the lower fish counts and things like that. But that place is in my blood, British Columbia. And, I want to start doing that again too.
Yeah, that is good. And I think, definitely knock on wood, but, it looks like this year has been, I think the Skeena's looking pretty good. And we talked to Trevor up in the OP thing. I think there are some good signs. We're hoping that, this will keep increasing, and, like there's still steelhead out there. They haven't disappeared, and so I'm excited for that. And the Atlantic salmon is another one. Is that one that you're touching on a little bit out there?
A little. I did go on a salmon trip last year. You're right. I mean, there's some very positive signs for the West Coast steelhead. I hope that, that's a trend that continues. It did seem like the salmon fishing was down this year though. So I just hoping that's a blip, but there are some concerning statistics and concerning signs there for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, and I just want to give one shout out to our steelhead school. We went up and fished with you, which was amazing. Had a great group, and I think we're going to be doing that again, right? The plan is this coming year. Are you still interested in putting together?
I'm all for it. I thought that was a great group last year. I would love to do it again in 2025, Dave.
Perfect. Yeah. And who are we mentioned Nick. Who is our third guy that was on that trip?
That was Kevin Bruce.
Yeah, Kevin. Yeah. That was such a cool trip.
Yeah. And, hopefully get the same house and get Mike the chef again.
Yeah, right, Mike. That's right.
Mike Cardicchini. Yeah, he did a great job. Hopefully get the whole band back together, and we'll do it even better this time.
Good. Well, yeah, we'll get the band. This is awesome. So, all right, Rick. Well, we'll send everybody out to rickkustich.com to check out the books if they want to get a signed copy or just see what you're up to. And this has been awesome. Another episode. I think this is number 3 for us. So you've been on 3 times, and we'll have to look ahead. Maybe as we get to that next trip, we'll think of something else to do. But thanks for all your time, Rick, and excited to get out back on the water with you.
Great, Dave. Always good talking with you. And I look forward to it.
Okay, today's call to action. Head over to rickkustich.com and pick up one of these books if you want to increase your odds of hooking into a muskie this season. If you're on Spotify, you can follow this show, and if you get a chance, do that, and that'll assure the next episode gets delivered to your inbox. Want to give a shout out to the shop. Right now, you can head over to wetflyswing.com/pro, and you can find out more about joining the shop. We launched this thing. It's going right now, and we are building a small grassroots community and building trips as we go. This is the best place if you want to find out how to connect and get in on the next trip. This is the place to do it. And that next trip that's going on right now, it's coming right around the corner, is Schultz Outfitters. Next week, we're launching the Smallmouth Bass Week, and Mike Schultz will be on Monday to kick it off. Big giveaway starts Monday. But if you want to get in on the trip, we're going to have some paid spots for the trip with Schultz. They're going to go fast for sure on this one. So head over to wetflyswing.com/smallmouthbass and enter your name and email. We'll follow up with you on availability. If it's early as it is right now, you might have a shot. You probably have a really good shot at getting in on this one. All right. I want to thank you. It is late in the night. I'm just wrapping this up so I can save a little time for the morning. And I hope you have a great evening, great morning, or great afternoon. Wherever in the world you are, I appreciate you for stopping by today and listening to the very end. Talk to you soon.